The silence was the first sign. Not the quiet of an empty room, but the oppressive, deafening absence of sound that should have been there. Traffic, distant sirens, the hum of the city. Then came the dust, fine and white, coating everything like a sudden winter. And Maya knew the world had ended, not with a bang, but with a whisper of chalk. If you enjoy this story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more content. The chalk line. Maya pulled the surgical mask higher, the sterile fabric doing little to filter the panic now tightening in her chest. The apartment door, solid oak and triple-bolted, felt flimsy beneath her hand. She hadn't slept in 48 hours, not since the broadcast cut out, replaced by a single looping tone that had thankfully ceased just hours ago. Now there was nothing but the silence. She kept running the sequence in her head. Monday, 7:15 a.m., the power flicker, the phone lines dying, and then the silence. The official reports, the last few desperate crackling ones, had pointed to a localized grid failure, maybe a massive solar flare. Lies. Everything was a lie. She stepped over the threshold into the main hallway of her building in downtown Philadelphia. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of ozone and something burnt, like metal or wet cement. The usually vibrant graffiti-tagged walls were now a uniform pale gray, the chalk dust clinging to every surface. A bicycle, left against the wall by the superintendent's grandson, was half buried in the stuff, its red paint muted to a dull rose. The light fixtures, perpetually buzzing before, were now dark, and the only illumination came from the weak, filtered sunlight struggling through the grime-caked window at the end of the corridor. Maya's goal was simple, yet felt impossible. Reach the emergency bunker beneath the old municipal library, 5 blocks away. Her grandfather, a man she'd always considered paranoid, had built it during the Cold War, a steel-reinforced project that everyone, including Maya, had mocked as a waste of space and time. Now it was her only prayer, the only place she knew for certain had independent air filtration and enough canned rations to last a month. She gripped the leather strap of her satchel, inside which were 3 cans of tuna, a bottle of water, half full, carefully rationed, a faded map of the sewer access points, and the chipped porcelain figurine of a bluebird, a useless talisman, but the only thing she had left of her mother. The journey began with the elevator. She pressed the down button, forgetting for a moment the power was out. No light, no whirring cable, just the hollow click of the button. Stairs it is, she thought, the realization settling like another layer of dust on her already burdened shoulders. She took a deep breath, the surgical mask smelling faintly of stale detergent and fear. The stairwell was a vertigo-inducing cylinder of shadowed concrete. As she descended, the sound of her heavy work boots echoed, a lonely rhythm that felt too loud, too revealing. On the second-floor landing, she stopped, her heart seizing. A dark smear marked the wall, too high to be a shoe scuff, too thick to be dirt. It was the color of iron mixed with mud. She didn't have to touch it to know what it was. Blood. She whispered to the empty air. The they in her mind were the couple from 2B, the young, loud newlyweds who had always kept their door open and their stereo blasting classic rock. She hadn't heard a peep from them since the silence fell. The chalk dust had covered the worst of it on the floor, but the wall bore witness. She moved faster now, the need to escape the building overriding the need for caution. The silence outside felt better than the silence inside, which seemed to press down on her, magnifying every terrifying thought. The lobby was the worst. The main glass doors had been violently shattered, the jagged shards swept up into a messy pile by someone who had clearly given up halfway through the task. A lone shopping cart, its wheels twisted and useless, lay on its side, a strange metallic monument in the center of the room. The chalk dust here was deepest, swirling like smoke around her ankles with every step. Just as she reached the broken doorway, she froze. A noise. It wasn't loud, but in the pervasive quiet, it sounded like a shotgun blast. Scrape. Drag. Scrape. It was coming from the mouth of the alley across the street. Maya pressed her back against the cool marble of the check-in desk, her breath held tight. She had an old, heavy-duty flashlight in her satchel, but no weapon. She was a librarian, not a soldier. Her grandfather's warnings about the unprepared masses and the darker side of humanity had always seemed like B-movie fodder until now. She risked a slow, agonizing peek around the corner of the desk. The alley was a canyon of shadows and fire escapes. And there he was. A man, clad in what looked like a tattered security uniform, was hunched over something near a dumpster. The scraping sound was the dragging of a heavy metal bar, which he was using to pry open a sealed crate. The chalk dust coated him, turning his dark clothes a mottled, spectral gray. He wasn't looking around. He was focused. He succeeded in popping the crate. With a grunt, he hauled something out, a small, gleaming propane tank. It wasn't the tank that made Maya's stomach turn. It was the way he moved, slow, methodical, with an unnerving lack of concern for noise. He didn't seem panicked or desperate, just hungry. He glanced up, and the weak light caught his eyes. They were wide, unfocused, and milky white, and his skin was a bruised, mottled purple beneath the fine white powder. He wasn't looking at the street. He was just staring into the middle distance, and then his lips pulled back in a silent, grotesque snarl. He smelled the air. Maya didn't wait. This wasn't a desperate scavenger. This was something else. A sickness. The sickness. She turned and ran, not back up the stairs, but out the broken doors and onto the deserted street, her boots churning the chalk dust into frantic clouds. 5 blocks. She just had to make it. 5 blocks. The world outside was a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. Cars sat where they had stalled, their doors ajar, their radios silent. a final petrified traffic jam stretching to the horizon. The windows of the coffee shop on the corner were smashed in, and the cafe table that usually sat outside was overturned, covered in the pervasive white grime. The man from the alley was behind her. She heard the scrape, drag, scrape of his bar hitting the pavement, and now a low, rattling inhale that was definitely not a normal breath. She forced herself faster, pushing her untrained body past its limit, the dull ache in her lungs turning into a sharp, burning pain. As she sprinted past the newsstand, she caught a glimpse of a headline on a discarded newspaper, the ink preserved beneath a thin film of dust. Mass quarantine. CDC urges calm. The date was 4 days ago, 4 days since the whispers began. She rounded the corner onto Elm Street, the library's clock tower, a beautiful, imposing shadow just 3 blocks down. Her heart soared for a moment. She could make it. She had to make it. Then she saw the chalk line. It wasn't dust. This was a deliberate line, etched into the asphalt, stark white and perfectly straight, running from the base of a lamppost to the center of the road, and then continuing for as far as she could see. It was a demarcation, a boundary. And standing on the other side, waiting in the doorway of a laundromat, was another figure. This one was different. He wore a crisp, dark tactical suit, his face completely covered by a tinted helmet. He held a rifle across his chest, the weapon looking impossibly heavy and real. He wasn't covered in dust. He was clean. He was watchful. He was a sentinel. He saw her. His helmeted head cocked slightly, acknowledging her presence, but he made no move to help. Maya skidded to a halt, caught between 2 impossible threats, the infected horror dragging his metal bar behind her, and the silent armed guardian standing on the other side of the chalk line. Scrape, drag, scrape. The sound was closer now. The sentinel raised his rifle, not pointing it at Maya, but at the empty space between her and the corner she had just turned, a warning. The chalk line wasn't a boundary for the infected. It was a boundary for her. She had one choice. She took a final shuddering breath, clutched the strap of her satchel, and ran toward the silent man, straight across the chalk line. The moment Maya's boot scuffed the pavement beyond the chalk line, everything changed. The air, which had been thick with the smell of ozone and dust, suddenly held the faint metallic scent of cordite. It was the smell of control, of lethal intent. The sentinel moved with a shocking, fluid economy of motion. He didn't turn to look at Maya. His focus was entirely on the approaching threat, still rounding the corner she'd fled. The metallic scrape, drag, scrape of the infected man's bar had given way to a wet, desperate gasping as he broke into a shambling run, sensing his prey was near. "Get down, now!" The sentinel's voice was a low, synthesized command through his helmet speaker, devoid of emotion, like an automated warning. Maya instinctively obeyed, dropping to a crouch beside the laundromat's broken ceramic flower pot. The laundromat itself was dark, the massive, circular doors of the washing machines staring out like dead, vacant eyes. A heartbeat later, the infected man burst into view. He was fully visible now, uniform ripped, face contorted, that unsettling, milky blindness in his eyes. He crossed the corner of the sidewalk, stumbling a moment, and then his feet hit the chalk line. That was the trigger. The sentinel did not hesitate. The suppressed rifle barked once, a sharp, muffled thwack that seemed loud enough to shake the dust from the sky. The shot was precise. The man's momentum carried him one step past the line, his chest jerking violently, as if punched by an invisible fist. He released a strangled, gurgling sound that was immediately cut short. The metal bar clattered to the ground, and the man collapsed forward, his body ending up just inches past the pristine white boundary, his milky eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. Silence returned, deeper and heavier than before, a suffocating blanket woven from the single gunshot. Maya scrambled to her feet, shaking, her adrenaline-fueled flight giving way to cold, paralyzing terror. She looked from the dead man, whose blood was already staining the white chalk to a horrific pink, to the sentinel. I need to get to the library, she stammered, pointing a trembling finger down the street. 5 blocks. I need to get to the municipal. There's a bunker. The sentinel slowly turned, his visor reflecting her own terrified image back at her. He didn't lower the rifle. His silence was more intimidating than any shouting could have been. "You crossed the chalk," he stated, his voice flat, accusatory. "I was chasing me. I didn't know what else to do. Who are you? Are you military? CDC? I need help. They said the zone was clear this far west." "The zone," the sentinel repeated, the synthesized voice lending the word an air of ridicule. He gestured with his chin toward the body, which was now beginning to twitch slightly, the nerves still firing. "That is what happens when you cross the chalk line. You have committed an unregistered breach of the designated containment perimeter." Maya's mind struggled to process his detachment. Designated by whom? There are no markings, no barricades, just chalk. You're shooting people for crossing a line of chalk. You are committing... I am shooting infected for crossing the line, or anyone who makes a tactical run at the perimeter. We have protocols. You should not have entered the secured sector. Secured sector? Maya looked around at the broken windows, the overturned cars, the absolute desolation. This isn't secured. This is a morgue. It is secured against the spread by us. He finally took a step closer, and Maya flinched back. The suit was immaculate, completely sealed, making him look less like a man and more like a high-tech machine. The organization he belonged to, whatever it was, had resources. "My designation is Guardian 7. You are now designated a Class B violator. Uninfected, but unregistered. You have 2 minutes to state your purpose before I am required to initiate Phase 2 protocol." "My purpose is survival," she cried out, frustrated tears stinging her eyes. "My grandfather's emergency bunker is under the library. I'm Maya Petrova. I'm a librarian. I live on 14th Street. Please, just let me pass. I won't tell anyone you're here." Guardian 7 lowered his rifle a fraction, the barrel now pointing at the ground, a small concession. The municipal library is in the secured sector, and it is currently occupied. Maya's heart plummeted. Occupied? By whom? By us and those we deem necessary. The facility is a command post, Unit 3. It is not a public shelter. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her sanctuary was their fortress. Her paranoid grandfather's preparation had ironically put her straight into the hands of whatever private, militarized force had taken control of the city. Then, what am I supposed to do? You can't just leave me here. The rest of the city, it's chaos out there. That thing was chasing me.
He lifted his rifle again, but this time he pointed it away from her, scanning the rooftops. The immediate threat is noise. The sound of the shot will have drawn more of the infected. We have less than 60 seconds before they converge. He then did the unexpected. He reached to his belt, unclipped a small, heavy-looking device, and tossed it to her. It was a rugged, handheld radio with a single glowing green button. Hold this. Do not speak. Do not activate it unless you are facing immediate death. It will give your location to the nearest patrol unit, he instructed. Now, listen carefully. I cannot bring an unregistered civilian directly into the command post without severe risk of contamination or breach of security clearance. However, I can give you an alternate path. Maya stared at the radio, its cold weight in her hand offering the first tangible security she'd felt in days. An alternate path to where? The sewer access point at the corner of Biddle and 6th Street. There is a deep-level overflow cistern marked with a white X on the grate. Go in there. Move 200 meters west. You will find a hidden ladder leading to a ventilation shaft that surfaces inside the library's sub-basement quarantine annex. It's an old supply route. Avoid the main tunnels. They are infested with both sickness and unregistered hostile scavengers. He turned back to face the street corner she'd just left. The distant, faint sounds of shuffling and the occasional low groan were beginning to drift toward them, confirming his grim timeline. "Why are you telling me this?" Maya whispered, clutching the bluebird figurine in her satchel. "Because if you survive the sewers, you will be in the secured sector, but not at the command post. I can process you then as a found civilian, outside the strict breach protocol. And because the command post needs a librarian who knows the old maintenance access routes, and you are the only candidate who just survived a direct pursuit through a contested zone." His eyes, barely visible through the visor, seemed to assess her with a sudden, chilling interest. "The sickness is fast, but it only chases what it sees. The scavengers hunt what it hears. The sewers are deafening, but they're also blind. Now, go." He spun on his heel and moved back to the center of the street, pulling a second, more compact weapon from a hip holster, a high-powered automatic pistol. He stood guard over the chalk line, an unmoving statue of lethal capability, ready to hold the perimeter against the incoming wave of infected. Maya knew the intersection he named. Biddle and 6th was 3 blocks behind the library. A detour into the dark underbelly of the city. A terrifying journey through the wet, rank tunnels she'd only ever seen on maps, all while carrying the chilling knowledge that her only way into her sanctuary was now controlled by the very people who had drawn the line between the living and the doomed. She hesitated for a final, frantic second. "Go, Petrova," Guardian 7 commanded, his voice now tight with urgency. "I am engaging in T-5 seconds. Once the firing starts, the perimeter is closed, and you are no longer my concern."
With the muffled sounds of the gathering infected growing louder, Maya looked down the street at the silent clock tower of the library, now a beacon of false hope and militarized control. She turned her back on the chalk line and ran, not toward the light, but into the deepening shadows toward Biddle and 6th, the heavy radio clutched in her hand. The fate of the city, and perhaps her own survival, now depended on her ability to navigate the suffocating darkness of the labyrinth below. Maya reached Biddle and 6th Street in a stumbling, desperate sprint. The air behind her had split open with the deafening chatter of Guardian 7's weapons fire, a rapid, echoing sequence of crack, 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 cracks, interspersed with the heavier thwacks of the rifle. The sounds of the combat, the grunts, the tearing of fabric, the metallic ringing of rounds hitting concrete were her macabre soundtrack, urging her onward. The knowledge that a single silent man was holding back a wave of the sickness for her benefit was a cold, terrifying weight of obligation. The intersection was dark. The buildings here mostly old warehouses and forgotten storefronts. She fumbled with the radio, not daring to press the green button, but relying on its cold, reassuring weight. The corner was where she had been directed. The steel sewer grate, large and round, was exactly where Guardian 7 had described. And there it was, a faded, chalky white X, crudely marked on the iron bars, a secret sign visible only to those looking for it. The grate was massive and bolted. Maya dropped her satchel and checked the heavy work boots she was wearing. Librarian by trade, survivor by necessity. She found a loose piece of rebar, rusty and jagged, lying in the gutter. Using it as a lever, she worked the rebar into the gap between the grate and the asphalt. She pushed, grunted, strained, her muscles screaming in protest. The bolt heads were completely corroded. After several agonizing minutes, the rusted metal finally gave with a high-pitched grinding shriek. She shoved the heavy grate aside, the sound of metal on concrete echoing sharply in the momentary lull of the distant gunfire. The opening revealed a black maw, a circular shaft leading down into a smell that was an assault on the senses. Stale water, decomposing organic matter, and the powerful, cloying chemical odor she couldn't place. It was the smell of the city's underbelly, forgotten and festering. She shone her flashlight into the hole. The beam cut through a thick, greenish mist, revealing a slick, algae-covered ladder bolted to the wall. Water pooled at the bottom of the shaft, glinting dimly in the light. She clipped the radio to her belt, slid the rebar down the shaft to serve as a makeshift warning device, and swung her legs over the edge. The cold, wet metal of the ladder shocked her through her jeans. Her descent was slow, agonizingly cautious. She was aware that a single slip, a fractured limb, would mean a slow, solitary death in the dark. When her feet hit the bottom, the water came up to her ankles, instantly soaking her socks. It was frigid, the cold seeping into her bones. The shaft opened into a vast concrete tunnel, the main overflow cistern. It was wide enough to drive a truck through, built generations ago to handle Philadelphia's worst storms. The main drain channel was a deep, black trench running down the center, the water in it moving with a sluggish, sickening flow. The metallic clang of the rebar hitting the concrete far below her startled her, but also provided a moment of grim satisfaction. A potential weapon now lay in the darkness. She looked back up at the circular patch of night sky, now framed by the manhole opening. Even from this depth, she could hear the faint, muffled symphony of violence from above, a constant reminder of the razor's edge she had just stepped off of. She had to move. Following the Guardian's instructions, she turned west. Her beam cut through the tunnel, revealing only concrete, water stains, and the occasional slick, iridescent patch of chemicals. 200 meters. In the dark, the distance seemed insurmountable. She was 10 minutes in, the rhythmic slosh of her waterlogged boots the only sound in the suffocating blackness, when she saw the first sign of life, or rather, occupation. A pile of debris, carefully stacked in an alcove, old tires, plastic sheeting, and broken cinder blocks. It wasn't the natural detritus of the sewer. It was a barricade. And leading from the barricade, scuffed into the wet silt on the floor, were fresh footprints. Not the heavy, uniform tread of a soldier's boot, but the irregular, varied marks of cheap sneakers and worn work boots. The scavengers. Guardian 7 had said they were hostile and unregistered. That meant they were likely survivors like her, but driven by a primal need for supplies, willing to hurt or kill anyone who stood in their way. She realized the sickness was not the only enemy. Survival in this new world meant navigating the terrible choices of the uninfected as well. Maya dimmed her flashlight to a weak pencil beam, shielding the lens with her hand. She pressed herself against the cold, damp wall and continued forward, her pace dropping to a creeping, agonizing, slow crawl. Suddenly she stopped. Not from seeing anything, but from hearing something. A different sound. Not the slosh of water or the distant echo of gunfire. This was a human sound. A low, ragged cough. It came from ahead, around a bend in the main tunnel, perhaps 20 meters away. She quickly dropped to her knees, sinking into the freezing, filthy water, and pulled her satchel to her chest. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the loud, frantic drumming in her ears threatening to betray her. She felt for the radio on her belt, her finger hovering over the green button, but hesitated. Activating the radio meant bringing the Guardians and their lethal protocols down upon her and potentially everyone else in the tunnel. It was a last resort. She had to get to that cistern, find the X, and get into the ventilation shaft. A voice, muffled, hoarse, and definitely male, drifted around the bend. "Got nothing down here, I'm telling you. This section is dry. Need to hit the cross feed near the old mint." A second voice, higher pitched, less patient. "Shut up, Leo. You heard the boom. Someone just made a big noise topside. Someone with guns. That means supplies. We need to check the inlets. They drop things. Always drop things." They were coming her way. 2 of them. Scavengers. They had heard the fighting, and they were hunting the scraps left behind, or the survivors. Maya scrambled into the small alcove where the barricade was, sinking behind the old tires, praying the darkness would swallow her whole. The chemical smell in this part of the tunnel was stronger. She realized it must be industrial runoff, a solvent or something similar. She gripped the rebar she had dropped, its jagged end now slick with water and filth. It was a pathetic weapon against whatever they were carrying, but it was all she had. The light appeared first, a bobbing, cheap LED lantern, casting grotesque shadows on the sewer walls. Then the men. They were ragged, covered in mud and grime, their faces gaunt, etched with desperation and distrust. The one called Leo was older, his jacket torn. The other, younger and leaner, carried a heavy-looking length of steel pipe. They stopped directly in front of her hiding spot. The younger man, the one with the pipe, gesturing impatiently. "Look at the silt, Leo. Fresh prints, boots. Someone's been down here in the last hour, and they were running west toward the Mint. We'll cut them off at the junction." "Maybe a guard patrol, Jax," the older man Leo mumbled, nervously checking over his shoulder. "A guard patrol wouldn't be alone, Leo. This is one person, a civilian, maybe loaded down with supplies from the drop. Come on," Jax urged, starting to move forward. They were walking right past her. Maya held her breath, her chest tightening so painfully she felt lightheaded. Her eyes were wide, staring through a gap between two tires. She could practically smell the stench of their unwashed clothes and the dampness of their fear. Just as they were about to pass completely, the younger man, Jax, stopped. He hadn't looked at the alcove, but his eyes were... He reached down, and his fingers closed around the porcelain bluebird figurine. It must have fallen out of her loosely closed satchel when she dropped to the ground. The dust that coated it topside had washed away, leaving the bright, delicate blue of the bird in stark contrast to the mud and filth of the tunnel floor. Jax held the figurine up, turning it over in his hand. "Well, well, looks like the runner dropped a clue. A woman, Leo. A dainty little thing." He looked toward the west tunnel, a predatory grin splitting his face. "She won't be hard to track. And a woman means a jacket, maybe some jewelry, maybe a pack with real food. Let's go get her." Leo, his hesitation gone, nodded quickly. "Right, the crossfeed. We'll be there waiting." They hurried off, their heavy footsteps receding quickly into the western gloom, leaving Maya paralyzed in the cold water. They were not only hunting her, they now had a clear image of their target. The bluebird, her mother's talisman, her single useless luxury, was now her death warrant. She crawled out of the alcove, retrieving her satchel, and shone the dim light on the floor. Her heart sank. Jax was right. She had been running, leaving a clear line of deep boot prints in the silt. She had to ditch the direct path. She looked around frantically. Her eyes caught a sight she had missed before. Just above the waterline, half hidden by a burst pipe, was a small, square service entrance, a metal door set into the concrete wall. It was marked with a faded, barely visible number, V17. It looked like a maintenance access point, the kind of forgotten side tunnel that was probably choked with rubble and steam pipes. It wasn't the way Guardian 7 had told her to go, but following the direct route was now suicide. She had to take the risk. She climbed out of the water, ran to the door, and jammed the tip of the rebar into the corroded latch. She pulled, and the latch groaned in protest, but refused to give. She pulled again, harder, putting all her weight and desperation into the effort. The metal shrieked again, agonizingly, and then, with a final, echoing clang, the door flew open. A burst of hot, thick air, smelling powerfully of chlorine and rusted iron, erupted from the opening. It was a ventilation tunnel, and it was pitch black. She slipped inside the narrow passage, barely having enough room to turn around. She managed to pull the rebar in after her, and then, with another desperate heave, she pulled the heavy metal service door shut, jamming the rebar through the latch handle for good measure. The sudden, complete darkness was absolute. The sounds of the sewer were instantly muffled to a faint, distant rush. She was sealed in. She couldn't hear the scavengers, but they couldn't hear her either. She turned on her flashlight, casting a single beam down the narrow cylindrical pipe. It was a crawl space, not a tunnel, forcing her to hunch over completely. The air was stiflingly hot, and the walls were lined with heavy humming pipes that radiated heat. It was the absolute opposite of the cold cistern. She began to crawl, the rough concrete scraping against her knees, the humming of the machinery a steady, oppressive drone. She was moving away from the main route and further into the unknown, but she was moving. After what felt like an hour, her arms and legs aching, her lungs struggling with the stale air, the pipe began to slope upward. She reached a junction, a vertical shaft going straight up, and there, scratched into the dusty concrete wall, was a faint, familiar mark, a crudely drawn white X. The secondary route, the supply route. It was a risk, but it had led her to the connection. She looked up. A steel ladder led into the ceiling, disappearing into an even deeper darkness. She had found the way into the library's sub-basement quarantine annex. Now, all she had to do was climb. She set her teeth against the rising fear and began her ascent.
The ladder was cold and damp, a jarring contrast to the stifling heat of the ventilation pipe. Maya climbed slowly, her muscles burning, her mind numb from fear and exhaustion. The vertical shaft was narrow, forcing her to press her body close to the rungs. After what seemed like 100 feet of desperate ascent, her outstretched hand hit metal, a trapdoor. She paused, catching her breath, and tested the door. It was heavy steel, sealed tight. She placed the radio against the metal and whispered into the receiver, keeping her voice low enough that even if the scavengers returned, the ambient noise of the sewer pipes would swallow the sound. Guardian 7, this is Petrova. I'm at the ventilation shaft entry point. Biddle and 6th, the sub-basement access. I'm in the shaft, requesting entry. Silence. A horrifying, protracted silence. She repeated the message, her voice a little louder this time, tinged with a fresh wave of panic. Then a faint metallic click echoed from above. The trapdoor latch had been released. A thin beam of light sliced through the darkness, illuminating the dusty underside of the door. The sound of heavy bolts retracting was mechanical and slow, a deliberate, measured sound of security clearance. Petrova, stand ready. Entry protocol initiated.
came the synthesized, familiar voice of Guardian 7, though it sounded clearer now, less tinny. The trapdoor lifted with a slow, grinding hiss of pressurized air. A figure in a full environmental suit, not Guardian 7, this suit was entirely white with black trim, was leaning down, a strong hand gripping the edge of the opening. Behind him was a room of sterile, fluorescent white. The air that rushed into the shaft was cool, dry and filtered, smelling faintly of bleach and something clinical like antiseptic gel. It was the purest air she had breathed in days. "Climb, now," the White Guardian ordered. Maya pulled herself out of the sewer shaft and rolled onto the floor, landing with a soft thud on a clean gray mat. She was in a small, square room, a decontamination chamber. The floor, walls, and ceiling were stainless steel. There were no windows, only a heavy-duty airlock door on the opposite wall. The White Guardian immediately slammed the trapdoor shut and twisted a massive locking wheel. He then turned his attention to Maya. "Remove the mask. Stand in the center circle. Do not touch the walls." Maya obeyed, peeling the soiled surgical mask from her face, inhaling deeply of the clean air. It felt like nectar. She stepped onto a pre-marked white circle painted on the steel floor. The Guardian, who had the airlock door, opened, revealing a short, brightly lit corridor. D-Unit gestured with his chin. "Move." Maya stumbled into the corridor. She was immediately met by Guardian 7, who stood there still fully suited, his rifle held loosely. But next to him stood a man who was shockingly unsuited. He was dressed in immaculate military fatigues, a man in his late 40s with a square jaw, closely cropped silver hair, and a pair of intensely calculating gray eyes. This was the first unmasked, unsuited, uninfected civilian Maya had seen in days, and he emanated an aura of rigid, unyielding command. He wore no weapon, but his presence felt more dangerous than any rifle. "Welcome, Ms. Petrova. I am Commander Elias Thorne of the Coalition. This is Command Post Unit 3, the man stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that suggested years of giving orders. He looked Maya up and down, his eyes lingering on her shivering, soaked state, the mud on her boots, the exhausted terror in her eyes. "We appreciate your cooperation in securing the perimeter." "You shot a man a few feet from me," Maya whispered, her voice husky from disuse and dehydration. Thorne gave a curt, dismissive nod. "We terminated an infected subject who was attempting to breach the chalk line. The perimeter must hold, Ms. Petrova. It is the only thing preventing the sickness from overwhelming the command and control units that still exist. It is a necessary evil." He didn't apologize. He didn't offer a moment of sympathy. It was pure, distilled pragmatism. "What do you want with me?" she asked, clutching her satchel tighter. "The library's true value is not the structure, but the deep storage vault beneath the original building. Your grandfather, Professor Petrova, was a paranoid genius. He built the shelter, but he also stored his life's work in the vault. The entire digital archive of the city's deep infrastructure, blueprints, maintenance schematics, and sensor array data for the entire northeastern corridor. We control the surface. He holds the keys to the underground. He's dead, Maya stated flatly. He died 5 years ago. I inherited the building. We know, Ms. Petrova, but he created a security key, a legacy safeguard, a complex multi-factor biometric key that only he or a specific member of his immediate family with the correct training can access. Thorne took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. Guardian 7 identified you as the granddaughter of the professor. You are the key. We need that data to effectively manage the remaining infrastructure and coordinate the full-scale containment efforts. I don't know any code, Maya protested. I'm a reference librarian. I catalog books. He showed me the bunker, not the secret vault codes. I only have the location, not the access. Thorne did not look disappointed. He looked calculating. Guardian 7, escort the civilian to the processing annex. Provide fresh fatigues, MREs, and water. Then bring her to the restricted access archive. She has the memory. She simply doesn't realize what she remembers. He turned back to Maya, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Welcome, Ms. Petrova. You will find that survival is no longer a matter of luck, but of utility. Your utility is significant. Guardian 7 led Maya down several flights of stairs and through a bewildering series of identical, sterile corridors. This part of the building felt less like a library and more like the inside of a massive, buried ship. The air was cool, the silence broken only by the hum of ventilation and the periodic click, hiss of automated doors. The Coalition? Maya asked, finally breaking the silence. Who are you? Are you U.S. military? No, Guardian 7 replied simply. We are an international contingency unit, activated when government collapse is imminent due to biological or mass casualty events. We are the cleanup and triage crew. We report to the Directorate, which is now the effective governing body for the remaining population centers. The remaining population centers? How bad is it? Guardian 7 stopped at a door marked Quarantine Annex 01. The sickness is in 90% of major U.S. cities. The primary military response failed due to the speed of the neurological collapse. Command Post 3 is one of 300 active zones maintaining perimeters. He opened the door, revealing a small, stark room with a single cot, a metal locker, and a sink. You are safe here. Change into the fatigues in the locker. Drink the water. Eat the MRE. He set a large bottle of water and a nutrient pack on the cot. The archive is on the sub-level. I will return in 20 minutes. He closed the door, and the click of the lock sent a shiver down Maya's spine. Safe, but a prisoner. Her sanctuary was a cage. She did as she was told. The heavy military fatigues were coarse but clean. The water was the most refreshing liquid she had ever tasted. The MRE, a bland, protein-rich paste, was hard to swallow, but it provided immediate energy. As she dressed, a small detail caught her eye. On the back of the metal locker, scratched into the paint, was a single word. Silence. Not the sound, the concept. Silence. She ran her finger over the rough etching. It wasn't a casual marking. It was deep and deliberate, made by something sharp. A hidden message from a previous occupant of the room. 20 minutes later, Guardian 7 returned, his metallic presence filling the small space. "Ready, Petrova?" They went deeper, descending to the lowest sub-level of the old building. The humidity here was oppressive. The corridors gave way to rough-hewn concrete tunnels, illuminated by bare, caged bulbs. They stopped before an imposing circular vault door, easily 8 feet thick, built of polished steel. It was the door to her grandfather's vault, the place she'd always been told contained old tax documents and sentimental family junk. The biometric scanner is integrated into the tumbler dial. It requires 2 things: a retinal scan, which will register your bloodline's unique vascular pattern, and a secondary cognitive key, a trigger word or phrase that activates the voice lock known only to the professor and his heir.
"I told you, I don't know a word or phrase," Maya insisted, staring at the intimidating mechanism. "You do," a new voice said. Commander Thorne had appeared from the shadows of a connecting tunnel. He was holding a worn, leather-bound volume. It was a first edition copy of Moby Dick, a book her grandfather had loved. "We found this in a box labeled Disposal on the mezzanine level. Your grandfather was a master of misdirection, Miss Petrova. Every time he spoke of the vault to his few trusted associates, he called it the Great White Whale," Thorne said, a dry smile on his face. He used the book to hide his final instruction. "We have exhausted every literary and historical reference possible to find the key. The phrase is not in the text. It is something he said to you, something only the 2 of you shared, something deeply personal." Thorne stepped forward, holding the book out to Maya. "It is your memory, Miss Petrova. You will search it. We need the deep infrastructure data now. Every hour we wait, another sector falls, and more uninfected die." Maya took the book. It smelled of old paper and dust. She remembered her grandfather, seated in his huge leather chair, reading this very book to her when she was a small girl, his voice booming like the sea. She held the book to her chest, closed her eyes, and tried to push away the horrors of the last 48 hours, tried to find the memory, the booming voice, the endless stories, the phrase, the key. "Call me Ishmael." No, too obvious. "The sea is master." No, too theatrical. Suddenly, a strange, half-forgotten moment floated to the surface of her mind. She was 10 years old. Her grandfather was showing her the emergency rations, pointing out the industrial-sized filters. She had complained about the darkness, the fear. He had smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and told her, "When the silence comes, the sun still shines. You will not fear the dark. You will find the light." She opened her eyes and looked at the complex tumbler. She raised her hand, placing her eye to the retinal scanner, a beam of cool red light washing over her pupil. Whir. Click. The scanner gave a soft, reassuring chime. Retinal match confirmed. Heir of Professor Petrova, M. Petrova. Now, the voice key. Commander Thorne and Guardian 7 stood motionless, watching her. Maya took a deep breath, and with a voice that was still trembling, but filled with a sudden fierce conviction, she spoke the words her grandfather had taught her to use in the deepest dark. "When the silence comes, the sun still shines." The vault door mechanism whirred,
clicked, and then with a deafening hydraulic whoosh, the massive steel door began to slowly, inexorably retract into the wall. The light that poured out was not the sterile white of the command post, but a soft, antique yellow. The vault was not lined with computers and servers. It was lined with books, thousands of them, floor to ceiling, stretching into the distance like a canyon of knowledge. And in the center of the room, standing before a solitary, brightly lit workstation, was a man. He was old, his hair white, his back turned to them. He was wearing the same style of military fatigues as Commander Thorne. He was not a prisoner. He was working. He slowly turned, and Maya's blood ran cold. He looked exactly like her grandfather, but decades younger, his eyes sharp and clear. This was not the professor, but a younger man, someone who had inherited the professor's work, or worse, was the professor, somehow preserved, somehow changed. Thorne stepped forward, his military composure momentarily shattered. "Director, you told us you were unable to retrieve the cognitive key." The man, the director, looked at Thorne with a cold, superior air. He ignored the commander and looked straight at Maya. His voice was calm, cultured, and utterly chilling. "Thank you, my dear Maya. The professor's legacy protocol worked perfectly. I needed a clean asset, an uncompromised perspective to access my true archive. You have performed your duty. Welcome to the Corps. Now, Commander." He turned back to Thorne, the air of absolute authority returning. "Bring the new asset to the observation deck. It's time she understood the true nature of the chalk line and the role her grandfather truly played in the silence."